ready to go.
Okay, thanks, Art.
We're going to start the YouTube stream. We've been holding off on that. So one second, we'll do a short countdown. Annie,
ready. 5, 4, 3, 2, 1.
Good morning, everyone. We call the meeting of the CFEC Board of Fish Joint Committee on Herring Fishery Revitalization to order. It's April 12th. We're in Kodiak. We're also live on YouTube with board support. I guess before we get started in the meeting, we'll go ahead and make an introduction of the panelists. My name is Tom Carpenter. I'm a member of the Alaska Board of Fisheries. I'm going to be serving as chairman for this committee. With me to my right is Mr. Jared Godfrey. He's also a Board of Fish member. To my left, in person, is Commissioner Glenn Haight with CFEC. We were the three people that were charged to kind of establish this committee and move it down the road. We can go around the room here. We have a couple of panelists in person. If Sam, if you'd like to introduce yourself, and then we'll go to Bruce, and we'll go to the people online.
You bet. I'm Sam Much. I live here in Kodiak, so I was maybe the Central Alaska representative and the fishing side of it on the panel. I grew up in a commercial family here in Kodiak that mostly focused on crab fishing at the time, and when I started my own fishing career, I just loved seining, and mostly it's been focused on seining, and over the last 30 years, I've diversified into other fisheries, just about everything there is around the state and around Kodiak, and love what I do.
Thanks. Bruce?
My name is Bruce Schockler. I've been in Kodiak for the last 50 years, primarily seining, but doing some crab fishing and longlining. I think for the purpose of this panel, I'm a representative of the Alaska Seafood Marketing Institute, with whom I also work for, and there I am the Global Food Aid Program Director. But I also have been charged by for the last 20 years by the various governors and legislatures to try to do something with the problem we have of herring underutilization and transitioning over from the old days to the new days. So I think I think I've been put on the panel as an SME representative or market representative. Okay. But
all right.
Thanks. Also, like I say, a recovering herring fisherman.
Thanks, Bruce. All right, we'll go online. We'll go to Mr. Miller. If you'd like to introduce yourself, please.
Yeah, good morning. Can you hear me?
All right. Yes, sure can.
Okay. Good morning. My name is Mike Miller, Mr. Chairman and committee members. I'm calling from Sitka, where I was born and raised. I've been involved in a lot of subsistence activities related to herring for the last 40 years or so, and various aspects of the herring fishery. Had 13 years and 3 secretarial appointments to North Pacific Research Board, 8 years with Alaska Scientific Review Group. I did work on the experimental kelp fishery in Sitka Sound for herring in 98 and 99, and various other things related to subsistence mostly. So I understand that I'm holding the subsistence seat for this panel, which of course I bring a lot of Sitka background, but obviously it's a concern for other groups all around the state. So I'll do my best. Thanks for letting me sit in.
Thank you very much. Mr. Woods, would you please introduce yourself?
Yeah, Frank Woods of Bristol Bay, Dillingham. Commercial fish in Kodiak herring since 1984. I purse seined for 12 years and gill netted for the last, well, yeah. Let me see, it's 10 years. So here as a not only a commercial user, but also I subsist out of Kalukuk on an annual basis, so thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Woods. Mr. Regnard.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. My name is Jeff Regnart. I'm a retired fishing biologist. I've been involved with herring probably for about 25 years when I was with the department. And currently I do consulting work and I'm contracted by BBDC, who asked me to put my name in for this panel. So in a sense, I'm representing them. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you. Mr. Peeler.
Yeah, good morning. Hi, my name's Justin Peeler. I'm a second generation fisherman, Southeast Alaska. I've fished quite a few of the herring fisheries in the state. I've done the different ones here in Southeast, the close pounding, the Sitka sacro, the bait herring. I've also fished herring in Togiak, made one stint in Prince William Sound at a very young age. And I've been involved in crab fisheries, longline fisheries, fisheries up and down the West Coast. I'm currently the vice president of the Southeast Alaska Seiners Association. I'm involved in various things here in Southeast for salmon, and so we put my name in here. So I currently hold a Sitka sacro herring permit.
All right, thanks for joining us today. And then finally, Mr. Woodruff, if you'd like to introduce yourself.
So John Woodruff, been involved in the herring fishery since 1978. Bought my first herring in Cashakes Cove. Probably bought as much and processed as much herring as anyone in the state. I've been participating from Cashakes to Norton Sound and beyond. Again, buying since 1978. Have made mostly roe products, but also bait. Made some meal products, made a few times we made food products. We made dog food at one point. I got to say, I'm probably representing the old days here because I've talked to a lot of folks. In fact, I know pretty much everybody on the call except for the first three folks. I know them fairly well. We've talked a lot about trying to find something to do with herring because there's a lot of it right now. Anyway, I'm happy to be here and look forward to participating.
Appreciate you being here as well. Art, if you'd like to introduce yourself and maybe anybody that's here up with the support staff.
Sure. Thank you, Tom. Good morning. My name's Art Nelson. I'm Executive Director for the Board of Fisheries. And from our board staff today, we've got Annie Bartholomew and Savannah Hollingworth doing various support roles in the background.
Thank you, Art. Mr. Starr.
Morning, everyone. My name is Noah Starr. I'm an attorney with the Natural Resources section at the Department of Law, and here to help answer legal questions as they arise, both procedurally and substantively as the committee progresses. So good to meet you all virtually.
Thank you. We have some department staff in the room with us here in Kodiak. I guess we can just go around the room, and any of them that want to introduce themselves, they can. We can start back over here.
I'm Nick Segalkin. I'm the regional supervisor for commercial fisheries in the Western region. I guess I'll just introduce everyone. So James Jackson is our area management biologist for Kodiak. He's our expert in the area today. Probably be doing a lot of talking. And then we also have Kevin Shaberg, who's the research coordinator for finfish in the region.
Thank you very much, Nick. Okay, we also, just for the audience, we have about 10 people in person in Kodiak in the room. We also have 28 people listening online, and we will continue to move forward. I don't know, I guess I could ask Mr. Godfrey or Mr. Haight if they had anything to add or would like to speak to anything before we move forward. Okay. So before we move forward, the second thing on the agenda is a lot of you might not be super familiar with the Open Meetings Act, and so we've asked Mr. Starr to just brief the panelists on just a short presentation on the Open Meetings Act. So Mr. Starr, if you wouldn't mind doing that, please.
Yeah, that sounds good. And I'm going to just share my screen really quickly for those who are attending by video, and I'll sort of verbalize for those who are listening on the phone. Can you guys see, or give me 1 second? Does everyone see who can see the presentation?
Yeah, we can see that.
Roger. Yeah.
Sweet. So I'm just going to give a quick run through of the Open Meetings Act, how it applies to this committee. I'll take any questions at the end, but the final slide is meant to give sort of clear guidance that hopefully steers us clear of any potential problems. It shouldn't be too complicated given how this committee is structured. So up in front of me is the requirements of the Open Meetings Act. I'll read some of it aloud so those who are listening can understand as well. And basically the point of it is that meetings of a governmental body are supposed to be public. The public should know when they're happening so they have an opportunity to participate if they so choose. This committee is an advisory committee. It still counts as a governmental body under the Open Meetings Act. But it has sort of a different rule for when the Open Meetings Act applies because it's an advisory committee. So I've got highlighted here sort of the 3 points of relevance. The first is when more than 3 members or a majority of the members, whichever is less, are present, and the gathering is prearranged. For 2, the purpose of considering a matter upon which the governmental body is empowered to act. And 3, the governmental body only has authority to advise or make recommendations for a public entity. So in this case, the board/CFEC, but has no authority to establish policies or make decisions for the public entity. That's when you have a meeting subject to the act. So just going through those 3 parts of the definition and how they apply here. The first part is, so how many members have to gather for us to be subject to the Open Meetings Act? Well, here the committee members are the 3 folks from the Board of Fish and the commission. So Commissioner Haight, Member Carpenter, Member Godfrey. So a prearranged gathering of the majority of our committee is 2, just because we're less than 3. So the purpose of the committee, so when a gathering of the majority needs to be open, would be anytime anyone wants to discuss with 2 members of the committee the charge to this committee. So I sort of copied and pasted from the board finding my summary of what you all are going to be doing. So if you're going to be talking about changes to the regulatory systems to support evolution in the herring fishery for the benefit of the seafood industry, talking about different markets, current or potential, and then reviewing the regs and figuring out ways to facilitate those markets, all of those kinds of conversations, we should err on the side of having an open meeting if they're going to be discussed. And then this last bit is just reminding us that we only have power to advise, which is why this sort of part of the definition applies. So just some quick guidance that I've sort of already talked about a little bit, but I'll make super clear. In order to comply with the Open Meetings Act, we need to make sure the meetings are reasonably public noticed. If 2 or more members are convening, that means we should publish the notice online, ideally 2 weeks ahead. The notice and timing should be consistent. And the notice should include the meeting agenda as it did today so that people understand what we're talking about. And perhaps what's most important for my guidance is conversations that might occur during or ahead of a meeting. So if panelists are emailing or talking in person and discussing the purpose of the committee, it would be safest to make sure that you're not talking with more than 1 member. So either Member Carpenter, Member Godfrey, or Commissioner Haight. Conversations between an individual committee member and panelists are okay between 1 member and as many panelists. And if you're emailing with a member, it might not be a meeting if it's not prearranged. I would say the safest thing is if you have a question about the charge of the committee and you're in the middle of a meeting, you shouldn't direct it at more than 1 committee member. If we're between meetings and you have a question to the committee, you're probably safe to email all 3 of them to see who gets a response. but I would caution the committee members as we get closer to the sort of charge of the committee or talking about a meeting that's upcoming by email, I'd stop the conversation and wait for an open meeting to carry it forward. So that's the general guidance I have. I'm happy to take any questions if there are any.
Thank you, Mr. Starr. Mr. Haight.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you, Mr. Starr. So I'm part of what I'll be doing is working on a research plan and reaching out to panel members. Probably most likely on email, but that's okay if I did? Should you just one at a time, or may I do multiple panel members in those email conversations?
So it's my understanding that the voting members of this committee are the 3 members across the commission, yourself, and then the 2 board members. So you can include in your emails, if it's just you, Commissioner, as many panelists as you want, because there wouldn't be a majority of the committee. But if you included Mr. Carpenter or Mr. Godfrey, that would be, I think, safer to be done in a public meeting.
Great, thank you.
Any other questions for Mr. Starr? Thank you, Mr.
So
Starr.
John
Please.
Woodruff here. I just have a clarification question. What I understand is that I can contact any of the people multiple times in multiple groups, with the exception of the 3, Mr. Carpenter, Mr. Godfrey, and Mr. Haight. Is that correct?
That's correct.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Woodruff. Anyone else? All right, thank you, Mr. Starr. Appreciate that update and guidance for the committee to move forward. I guess, Mr. Haight, I kind of overlooked, you do have some CFEC staff here as well. I don't know if you'd like to introduce anyone online or anyone in the room.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I appreciate that. Could have slipped my mind. Yeah, Reed Johnson is here, our research section lead. Great to have Reed here. We got Shanti Perry, our executive director, is also in the Zoom, and fellow Commissioner Mike McCarr would have joined, but he's not feeling well, so he's sitting this one out, Mr. Chair. Thanks. Thank you. Okay, before we move on with the agenda, I want to kind of put something on the record. This was the charge. It's been publicly noticed what the charge was, but just for the benefit of the people listening and the people in the room that may not have seen it, this was a Joint Board of Fisheries, Commercial Fisheries Entry Commission, a Revitalization Committee 2024-304FB. And the synopsis from the charge, which was signed by the Board of Fisheries chairman, was that Alaska's herring roe fisheries have been in decline since the 1990s. The regulatory structure was designed to support a majority of harvest for herring roe to facilitate higher value markets and uses for herring. Regulatory structures must change. The Alaska Board of Fisheries is a state lead entity for creating and amending fisheries for the maximum value. Since the 1970s, the board has established numerous herring fisheries around the state, which include historic allocations to certain uses. The Alaska Commercial Fisheries Entry Commission was established to limit participation in fisheries, in part to support economic stability for commercial fishermen. As the commission established its permitting system for herring, it was done based predominantly on seasonal fisheries in product form, i.e. sac roe, roe on kelp, food and bait. Both authorities recognize that the regulatory system may need to adapt to support changes in herring fisheries for the benefit of the seafood industry. To better understand current and potential markets, review potential regulatory changes to facilitate those markets, the board and the commission agree to establish a joint committee on herring revitalization statewide. That's basically why we're here today. The committee will meet at least once in the spring of 2024, but is envisioned to meet at least 3 times by January of 2025 to conclude its work. Final products may include assessments on current and potential markets, regulatory options for change to complement the potential and current market. The membership, we've already established what the membership is, and that was signed by the Board of Fisheries chairman on March 5th, 2024. So I thought I'd just put that on the record so that it was kind of laid out what the charge of this committee was, and what the goal moving forward is. this is kind of going to be a kind of a casual, open conversation. We have a public participation forum that's slated later on the agenda, so we'll take input and questions from the public online as well as people that are in the room here. So I guess next, it's just number 3 on the agenda is a discussion on committee potential and the purpose. I've kind of outlaid the charge of the committee, but I think it's interesting. We have a lot of people with a lot of experience here from around the state. And I think we're all well aware of the current situation revolving around herring. It's not a new situation. And I think that you can read in the newspapers, the online forums, and talk to people as you walk around the harbors of the state and realize that we have a really large resource out there that is really being under harvested for quite a few reasons. And so I think we can start the conversation there. I know plenty of you have a lot to say about this. I'll ask Mr. Haight or Mr. Godfrey if they'd like to add anything first, and then we can kind of go around the room and people online on the panel and just kind of have a general discussion on, you know, what their feelings are in regards to the state of herring and any ideas that they may have to move with throughout the committee. So Mr. Haight or Mr. Godfrey, anything to add before we open it up?
Yeah, jump in, Mr. Chair. Yeah, I mean, that the committee of charge is pretty much sums up where CPC is coming from, and we've got some technical changes to our system that we could make or may need to make, but they're complicated to unwind some of the stuff we have. I mean, it's a lot of legal issues to figure out. So I'd like to use this forum as part of that, understand how we might be able to do that fairly. But at the same time, you know, since we're here talking about herring, I think it would be great if we could really explore some of the aspirational things that folks are looking at, things that Bruce has been talking about for years. What markets can be developed? How can we start to turn some of the wheels of the public sector, such as ASME, more focused on getting into those markets? And what are they? I don't know how far we can get into that in less than a year, because some of that might take some real research, but it sure would be great to kickstart some of that. So hopefully we can get to some of that as well. So,
thank you, Mr. Haight. Mr. Godfrey?
I would just echo what Glenn said. More than anything, my priority is to listen and learn, and especially what Glenn said about the aspirational aspects here. So look forward to the discussion.
Thank you. I just want to make it a point. I believe the charge state, this committee is talking about herring issues statewide, and we are in Kodiak currently having this meeting, but that was kind of because there was another CFEC meeting that was going on, and so we kind of lumped it together so we could do it all in the same day. But we are talking about statewide issues, not necessarily just things that revolve around Kodiak. So I just want to make that clear to everybody. I think for myself, I'm also here to listen because I want to hear what the public has to say and the user groups have to say. But we, as a Board of Fish member, we did have some herring proposals that came up before us in Kodiak this year. And you know, there was some regulatory issues that probably it really kept the board from taking any action whatsoever. And I think that's kind of when Mr. Haight and myself, we kind of had a conversation one day that maybe we should see if the board and CFEC could kind of form some sort of committee for a short period of time to really see what the people that are harvesting this resource and the people that are using it as a subsistence resource really feel about the state of herring. And so I'll kind of leave it at there, and we can go to anyone in the room first, and then we'll go online. Bruce, I'm sure you have a few things to say, don't you?
Well, yeah. I'm not sure, you know, I mean, Glenn came out and said on our emails and our invites and all this, that they want to look at governance and they want to look at all kinds of other things as some sort of a big research plan. And I think maybe, I don't know what any of that means, really. So maybe Glenn should I mean, we're really here because of CFEC. We heard at the Board of Fish meeting from the department that they were cool. In fact, they can manage whatever the board decides, and then CFEC can just deal with it. That was one point of looking at it. Well, Glenn and his attorneys disagreed. Sent you guys that long letter, and no action was taken, and here we are. So I think that I'd like to hear, you know, what CFEC's come up with their, you know, where they want to go, because clearly what they want is put us here. So if we have governance, obviously you have some idea what that might be, or at least your opinion of it, and other types of research that you want to see done. So I think that would be a good place to start, Mr. Chairman.
All right. Would you like to respond, Mr.
Yeah,
Hague?
yeah. I know for those in the room here, you're probably familiar with Proposal 57 and to turn over some of the sack row harvest to the food and bait. That's something Board of Fish could have done. That was not anything that couldn't have happened.
Could I just clarify one thing, Glenn? It did not say that the proposal, which I wrote, never used the word food and bait. It just changed the season. Okay, so that, I think that's a misrepresentation, that the proposal said that they want to get into the food and bait business, quote unquote, into the food business, into changes for a different type of season. That's what it said in the proposal. So.
And it was something that I believe your proposals had the word food in it, but we can go back and look at that.
It was all food.
So, okay, so yeah, board could have made that change. We have a set of permit holders that have food and bait permits. And so we owe a duty to those folks like we would to you if they wanted to be able to go fish in the roe fishery, and they wanted to move their 10% to the roe. I mean, it's not practical, but we owe a duty to people who have limited entry permits. And so that's where we come from. So the board could have made that change, but we would have had to make some change as well. And so the board chose not to, and to see if CFEC would do whatever it would do. It's not the first time this has happened in the Board of Fish CFEC world. There's a proposal in the Southeast that's been spinning around for a long time where it requires both agencies to act. But we could have then taken, well, we're doing an optimum understanding of the food and bait fishery right now. And we're doing it looking at the 10% allocation. So if we find in that process that there should be more permits in that fishery, we might issue more permits. But 3 years later, the Board of Fish could come back and move that allocation to the food and bait. We're still right where we were. Where we would have to go through the process again and see now with 100% or whatever it is, should there be more permits issued, and we wouldn't have to go through that bureaucratic exercise. It's kind of the box we're in. So I don't know if this committee is going to resolve a lot of that. It'll answer some of the process questions that we have to go through. Because CFEC's never had an optimum study where it's found that there needs to be more permits and gone through the process of issuing it. We've never done that. So we'd like some guidance on that. But there's other issues. There's should we not be licensing or permitting by product form? Should we just have a herring permit, as opposed to food and bait or roe? We want to look at that. And if we did that, what would it take? What would we need to go through, and how would we address existing permit holders? So there's all those kinds of questions factor into it. But while we're here talking about herring, I think it's important to look at the market aspects, because I think that's what should be driving some of these legal decisions. Like, is there more value to be had, and what is that, and how do we get there? That helps.
Yeah, no, that's just, it's just good to set the stage with the Tom said what the charge is, and from the Board of Fish, and then CFEC's driving this whole, the purpose behind this. So to hear from you, that's great. That's all I wanted everybody to hear.
Thanks. Appreciate that, Glenn. Sam, you have anything to add?
I'll do that. I understand that Proposal 57 maybe started this conversation. As one of the 9 permit holders in the local food and bait fishery, you feel like it's a little bit of attack on your fishery, right? Because it's the only fishery in the state right now that is utilizing most of its quota. So our goal right now, if you're looking at herring fisheries around the state, is let's utilize herring fishing quotas and extract some value out of it. How can we maximize that value? Those are like the two simple things, right? So this fishery has been doing that since it went limited entry. We've been extracting, keeping our value the same. It hasn't gone up, $450 to $500 a ton. And we've been utilizing most of our quota. It's the only one in the state doing that, okay? And we have our other permit holders are on the sidelines. They would also like to participate, okay? It's not a fully participated fishery. That's a fishing game. Working with them, we've came up with one vessel participating at a time. Okay, my hopes are that we can move away from that narrow vision and look at what we can actually do around the state to help these other food and bait fisheries. They're not even using their quotas, Dutch Harbor or Southeast. Prince William Sound has herring revenue. We looked at that area in years. You know, some of us saw comments from that. There's options out there. So what are the paths? And I've been thinking about it a lot. And it's a monumental kind of thing in front of us. Where do you go with here? How do we get more people participating? How do you get, number one, is you need markets and some value to them. One of the things I looked at was, you know, and it might get a sigh, but you look at fish meal and you look at oil prices. The fish meal prices have been going up. I think they're around $18.50 a ton right now for fish meal. It takes 4 or 5 tons of raw product to make a ton of fish meal. But my understanding is, and then there's also the oil value, which is a pretty big number. And my understanding is that there's maybe some state regulations against using a product just for fish meal. I haven't seen those, but I'm told there might be something at the state level. And then I'm also told that on the federal level, National Marine Fisheries has kind of said, we don't want to go down that road of any new fisheries doing reduction, but like the Menhaden fishery and out of Florida, I think that one's maybe grandfathered in. I've heard that in discussion, but I don't really know the details of it. So, I mean, that's a possibility of something to look into when you have these monster herring classes that are huge. It's a way to maybe get some product moving and give some opportunity to coastal communities. Other than that, you know, when we look at the food thing, we need to look at that too, but there's just some monumental obstacles there with shipping prices, things like that. So hopefully we can focus on some things that can just help fisheries around the state.
Appreciate that. I think that's a valuable point. I think, you know, we, like I said, we are sitting here in Kodiak, and maybe proposal 57 is what kind of spurred this conversation. But my personal opinion is, I think this conversation is long overdue, specifically in a statewide forum, because there's a lot, like I said, there's a lot of underutilized resource out there that I think that we need to consider looking at. Is there anybody online that's on the panel that would like to enter into the general? Mr. Peeler?
Yeah, through the chair and to the rest of the people in attendance. You know, I think it's important to when I thought about this, and we talk about changes in a fishery and users, and there's, you know, in Southeast Alaska, there's, you know, subsistence users, multiple commercial industry users, different product forms, different things like that. And we're trying to, you know, figure out a way to change, but also figure out a way to respect those people's investment and things like that. And that's a hard thing to do. It's also important to remember that, you know, all of these, and this is to my knowledge, passed down to me from a mentor of mine, but all these fisheries have come about through change or redistribution of the resource. You know, in Southeast Alaska, to my knowledge, the sacro markets came about by basically setting aside areas for this new market because they were caught in food and bait fisheries and other fisheries. So they had to set aside areas to make sacro happen. The herring pound permits, they came from food and bait areas in Southeast Alaska that weren't being utilized. You know, Teneke Inlet, Craig Quawk area, a few others. Those were all, there had to be a change, you know, somebody had to give to get. And we want to respect all these different fisheries and what they have, but we also want to, you know, it also lays down a history of change. And I think that's important. I think it's important to note that as markets changed and people had an idea, the state of Alaska has a history of changing the format of the herring fisheries. And, you know, that's why I'm here, is because I'd like to see some changes made. Southeast Alaska, food and bait, it's a hard fishery. It's you know, just like any winter fishery, it's there's those difficulties, but also, you know, in Southeast Alaska, we're limited on our net, and that has a big, profound impact. If you can't get a steady product to the plant can't operate at a reasonable level. Therefore, you know, you don't really lose your market, but it becomes impossible to do and not profitable for anybody. So, you know, with that being said, there are years that the current net works great, but there are years where you're just driving around looking at thousands of tons of herring that you can't touch. And so without consistency in that fishery and the right tools, you're not going to see it utilized. So anyways, that's all I had.
Thank you. Mr. Regnard.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Again, I echo a lot of the committee members' comments so far, and I do appreciate Commissioner Haight putting those three buckets: markets, governance, and then biology, life cycle, as far as research topics. Because I agree, those are the main, in a sense, buckets that we want to fill through this committee process. But specifically, where I prioritize those is market. We have to understand what product form is going to sell in today's market. We know it's not what we've been doing, because what we've been doing isn't working anymore as far as, you know, an economically viable herring fishery in most places that have had herring fisheries historically. So what is that product form? You know, if you go to ASME, and Bruce can speak to this, they're going to say, okay, we'll sell it, but what's the product form? What are we actually going to push out into the market? And so that we have to help answer that question. So it's great to have this kind of experience in this committee, Woodruff and others. So maybe we can brainstorm and come up with some suggestions, guidance for future marketing opportunities. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Mr. Haight.
Thank you, Mr. Haight. Yeah, Jeff, I have a question, and it just comes to me, and I think I've heard it from other people over the years, but you may be in good position to answer this given your past. Do you think that there's enough difference in the fish up and down the coast that they would find different product forms, that there would need to be that sort of dissecting of markets based on the Togiak fish versus the Southeast fish?
Through the chair, you bring up a really good point. You know, Bering Sea stocks are very different as average size at age, longevity than a Gulf of Alaska stock. Dramatically different. You know, a lot of times Togiak will average 400 plus grams, and there's people in there that know Southeast better than I do, but they're less than half that. So distinct differences, and so that might mean that you have different market options, because one maybe is more readily available to do something with protein meat, and the other is maybe canned. Again, I'm not the marketing expert, but I think you bring up a really good point. And then the only thing I'd add, since we're just talking about Gulf of Alaska and Bering Sea, they also are very different as far as when they're available. Bering Sea to date with historical fisheries are available in the spring and maybe into summer. And then they go offshore and overwinter offshore and not available to the historical harvesting methods. Gulf of Alaska is a little different. You can find herring around Kodiak, you know, Sitka Sound in the middle of the winter. Same with Prince William Sound. So Gulf of Alaska's got a little more availability, if you will, outside of the sacro time, where Bering Sea does not. Mr. Chair.
Thank you.
Mr. Miller, did you have your hand up, or you took it down?
I took it down. I'll listen to everybody else. I want to talk a little bit about the subsistence part, but I don't want to jump into the middle of the marketing discussion yet.
Okay, we'll catch back up with you in a bit. Mr. Wood, you have your hand up?
Yeah, I did. First of all, I'd like to thank you for addressing this huge in Bristol Bay. We not only got Togiak stocks Sound north of us, in all the villages affected. And liking the idea of exploring different markets and different ideas. One of the things that I've come up with is that it'd be a Bering Sea or a Bristol Bay herring coalition exploring different markets such as food fish, bait fish, including canned, salted. But that's for future. For this meeting, I'd like to address that, number one, for the maximum sustainable yield, we haven't maximized anything in the last 20 years for herring. There are times I could say we have so much quota on the table. One of our market plans was to ship, it was Greg Blakey was, I think he tried to ship through the Northwest Passage a whole bunch of food fish for either the Western or, so there, what I'm saying is I'm glad to be a part of this. I'd like to introduce maybe a plan, since Southeast, Kodiak, and Bering Sea are different stocks, that we kind of maybe centralize. What I'm thinking is a Bristol Bay Coalition for the Bering Sea. And then what I've come up with is community harvest quotas to guarantee if we do secure markets, we have a secure supply for those markets, right? So in that arena, I posted the Native American Agriculture Fund just for ideas, because that outlines, it actually gives federal dollars for planning, production, and marketing of this food fish, right? So with that, I'll just sit back and listen. Thanks for the invite.
Thanks for being here. Anyone else like to touch on this? I mean, we have Mr. Woodruff. I'm not sure if you or Mr. Shackler would like to. I think you two would probably have the most knowledge in regards to the different markets that exist, you know, the changes that have happened in the marketplace in the last 20 years. So I don't know if you'd like to touch on any of that for a moment. Mr. Woodruff?
So can you hear me? I've been off and on muted, I think.
We can hear you.
Okay. So, you know, I'm just one guy. I mean, I've been around this herring fishery for 40 plus years, mostly in a sacro perspective, from a sacro perspective. But all this stuff, I mean, I've talked to Bruce at length about different product forms for herring. I've got another fellow I talked to, Warner Liu, who's working on a canned herring project. You know, there's lots of stuff. I personally have been involved in human food, pet food, dog food, meal, certainly. I mean, there's certainly some issues. A couple things I guess I just say. First of all, herring as a food source for either animals or humans is a great resource. We all know that. It's got good protein, it's got good minerals and vitamins, it's got good oil. All that stuff is very good. For pets, I think for dogs, it's a vitamin D. For the amount of vitamin D is a problem. You got to deal with that. But it's a great food resource. There's no question. The next thing I'd say is that, you know, the current market we've been focusing on is this Japanese Kaznoko market. You all know. I mean, it's dying. It's dying because the tradition in Japan is dying. And I don't think. I mean, this year we fished Sitka. We did it tentatively. We're fishing a little bit in Kodiak. Even more tentatively, we're not going to fish anywhere else for sacro. It's just, and let me back up. We will do a row on kelp. That market, it's a very, very small market, but that market actually is very positive. I think I'm not sure we're the only buyer in Southeast this year, but we're one of the 2 or 3 buyers in Southeast. And, you know, the harvest might be 300 tons, 300 short tons. So it's not a big number. And the Canadians play a lot in that. They're not harvesting a bunch this year either. So that's the one herring place where things look good, but it's very, very small relative to everything else. And people mentioned the resource. You know, Southeast resource, Sitka, is bigger than I've ever seen. We have a quota this year that's bigger than most of the years I participated in Sitka's biomass. It's crazy. Same with Togiak's got a huge biomass. I guess though, when you talk about markets, when you talk about what you're going to do with this stuff, you can explore a lot of stuff. A couple things though that are going to get in your way. One is consistency of supply, just like Sitka. It's huge now. It's been very small in the past. So if you're planning on harvesting a bunch of fish and getting it to a market that wants it year after year, that's going to be a consideration for sure. How do you provide consistency of supply? Because nobody's going to want to take your resource, which is going to be a product they're going to do something with, and suddenly find out, oh, we don't have so much this year. The other piece that's going to gets in the way of Alaska constantly, and that's logistics. It's almost as expensive to ship herring frozen from Sitka to Dutch Harbor as it is to buy the stuff and process it. It's almost that expensive. So logistically, Alaska's got, you know this, huge challenges. And that's another thing that's going to get in the way. I encourage people to, and I know Bruce and I have talked about this a bunch, but whatever we can do, but there are lots of impediments, and economics is certainly going to be a big issue. And you got to buy the stuff, you got to process it somehow in Alaska, and then you got to ship it to a place where somebody's going to make something into it that people are going to consume or pets are going to consume. So that's what I'll say for now. Thanks.
Appreciate that. Appreciate your perspective on that. Bruce, did you have anything to add?
Yeah, John's absolutely spot on all of that. And I'd like to bring up something that Frank said. You know, a friend of mine a few years ago sent off some Bering Sea herring to a market. Had all the nutritions, everything about it analyzed from lipids all the way down. The market said, well, okay, that looks good. We'll take a container of that. And if we like that, we'd like 10,000 tons. The answer is, can't get you 10,000 tons. And that's the end of the conversation. It's the supply. You create a market, you have no supply. You have no, and we have the consistency problem in any natural resource, like John said. But if you look, for example, through the fisheries in the mid 20th century, through the 1900s, until about 1950, and that's when the market crashed. But we were averaging over 100,000 tons a year being produced for everything from oil to salt product to canned product. So, and then it comes and goes and it crashes. So having the consistency of supply is a big deal. Having some sort of supply guaranteed, which only happens here through our quota, and it isn't as much of a deal in the Bering Sea because that's not a limited entry thing. Okay, a perfect example of supply issues that just happens naturally is the food and bait fishery, quote unquote, in Dutch Harbor. Well, that's not being taken care of. That's not because they don't have a market for the product, is they don't have access anymore. Those fish used to come right into Captain's Bay. We were fishing right in front of the westward dock. You almost drag a bag over it, have to pump it into the plant. Well, these guys are fishing 10, 15, 20, 30 miles offshore now. Just trying to get access to some of those. So you have that variability. But and then on the other hand, the Norwegian quota, the North Sea quota, that is down by like 35% this year in quota, down over 135,000 tons. So they've got big problems. Their research people, which would be, I guess, sort of like our NIMS people or NOAA people, are saying that a lot of people think that is going to completely crash because of their overfishing. They got all these problems with, nobody can agree. So everybody just sets their own quota. So we have that coming. It's one reason we have Jeff Ragnark working on an RFM, Responsible Fisheries Management, Alaska's version of MSC, if you will, to have our herring fishery certified, other than just a little piece of up in Norway. It would be the only certified fishery in the world. So that's part of your market. Another thing of access, and it's quite recent, just a few weeks ago, one of our local processors received a phone call asking how much herring they could fillet for him. He was said, well, how much? He says, as much as you can possibly produce. Well, there's no access. There's no guaranteed anything there, even if they get farther into and get past the logistics that John talks. So, if you get into a different product form, for example, like Sam said, we have here in Kodiak, and I think Petersburg's got a meal plant also. I'd say 50% of the North Sea herring, most of the mackerel, almost all the capelin, that's all goes into meal and oil. I mean, hundreds of thousands of tons into the meal and oil business. But I, for example, just last week for our food aid program, I took some bait. Sam, I'm sure, caught it. I had it locally hand filleted and ended up with about, since it was a bait product and it's not handled like food, there was a lot of we only got about a 30% recovery. But those I had custom canned for a presentation that I'm doing the end of the month in Washington, D.C. for International Food Aid. I had to have you can't give them your home pack. You got to have it commercially canned. So, and that's at their request of new products, shelf-stable products that can be used. Well, you go back there and let's say they decide they want 1 million cases, which isn't that much when you're looking at a 6-ounce can, to go to, I don't care, Ukraine, Somalia. It's back to what Frank mentioned as a guaranteed supply. Can't do anything here. We have no opportunity to get into the business of guaranteed supply, which is year round, if we don't have access to it. So, the nice thing about Togiak is that it's not limited entry. And those big fish, when you get into, for example, the specification that you have for pickled herring is not necessarily high oil. As we look at it as 20% oil. But on the other hand, you have those big Togiak fish that we've filleted quite a bit of them and sent them around the world. Probably 20 containers loads over time. But then with the lack of anything up there for the roe market, those particular companies weren't going to go up there just to fillet a few fish for a week or so. So but it has been tried. The nutrition of a large 400-gram fish up there is basically got 10% oil in it. Whereas one of the ones in Sitka in that same time frame of spawning phase might have less than 5%. So you go around the state and things are different. You have access that's different. But we're talking about limited entry, and which is pretty much, you know, the Gulf of Alaska. And the other thing about the Gulf of Alaska is good. We're closer to the market, and we have all kinds of opportunity for various kinds of products, be it meal and oil, be it canned, be it fricasseed, frozen, or fried. You also have, for example, you know, we're waiting to try to find somebody that's going to come in here and buy all the Trident assets. Well, there's an opportunity right there to produce those products right here. And rather than sending out raw product, which is all, you know, primarily what Alaska does with everything except canned, it could be produced right here in Kodiak, produced right there in Sitka or Petersburg or Ketchikan. Produced first and then shipped out as a food product. So those types of things that we don't look at when we talk about the big infrastructure problems. I mean, they can take them out of Germany, they can take them out of Denmark, and they can ship them all over the world. They can, and we buy them right down here at Safeway. You know, there's when you start shipping food, it's different than fishing the raw product, or I mean, shipping the raw product. So there's a lot there. It can go on forever. I don't want to bore everybody, but it's a big deal. But I think the principle that we're looking at here is consistent access, and without it, you have no development.
Thanks, Bruce. I think that's an important thing, and that's one thing that I've always considered is when I look at the GHLs around the state. You know, obviously, to get into certain markets and to develop certain product forms, you need to have access at very specific times of the year. And I think it's been stated on the record pretty clearly that, you know, places in the Gulf of Alaska, possibly Sitka, places that aren't even open like Cook Inlet and Prince William Sound, they haven't been open in years. The idea that possibility is going to change in the future is there as the herring populations recover and continue to grow around the state. Most of the access to herring, the access is the SACRO limited entry permits. And so one of the things that I'm interested in hearing is from people around the state, if they would like to develop new markets, and they, you know, it's kind of hard to take something away from a SACRO limited entry permit holder that once probably made quite a bit of money holding that permit, but probably doesn't today. Most of them probably haven't put their net in the water around the state in quite a long time. So I'm really interested to hear from people that hold those permits, if they are willing to kind of possibly look at the potential to open up other markets at other times of the year, but they would also have to potentially give up some access if the SACRO markets were to ever come back. So that's just something that I think about. Mr. Peeler, did you have something?
Yeah, if I may, just to go back on marketing, if I can, if that's okay. I know you started talking about access there, but to go back a little bit on marketing, when I was trying to put together a larger bait order for me here in Southeast Alaska in the Craig-Kawak area, it's a wintertime food and bait fishery. It also is a very strong biomass. I think right now, if you added up those two quotas with the Sitka Sacro quota, or we call it Sitka Sacro, but the actual permit is called Southeast Alaska Herring Seine permit or row permit. And anyways, you put those together, I think you'd have like 90,000 tons. And, you know, I talked about access earlier about, you know, nets being not the right size or whatever for the winter and not utilizing it. But when I was developing the bait market and trying to get more bait to sell besides what I could sell locally, about 5 years ago, there was a well-publicized crisis, if you will, in the Maine lobster fishery. And so I called over to a processor that was in this article. You know, they were all wondering where they're going to get their bait. And what I found is that Pacific herring was prohibited to be used in the state of Maine. And there's other states, I believe, that prohibit that too. And, you know, we could speculate on why, but, you know, the state of Alaska doesn't prohibit any bait. You can basically use anything. And, you know, the thinking that I have is, yeah, sure, I don't want to prohibit uses of bait if guys want to use bait, but that type of prohibition against Pacific herring has hurt the development of bait markets onto the east and the west coast. So I just wanted to point that out, something that I came across.
Thank you, Mr. Peeler. I'd like to give Mr. Miller the opportunity, if he wants to kind of address anything that he'd like to talk about in regards to subsistence. So Mr. Miller, if you'd like to say anything.
Yeah, great. Thanks for the opportunity to talk. It's interesting to listen to the discussion and recognize the problem. Some of the issues go all the way back when we worked in that experimental fishery, the raw and kelp fishery back in 98 and 99. I think it was recognizing there already was problems marketing and looking at alternative fisheries. I got actually recommended by this panel by the tribe. So I'm trying to limit my viewpoint to the things that have been approved by the tribe and the subsistence users in Southeast Alaska. I don't, you know, I want the panel to kind of understand, just based on some of the things that I've seen in a growing subsistence movement in Southeast. And again, that's kind of specific to the Sitka fishery. But it is interesting how much growth there's been in the subsistence use of herring roe on branches, especially in Southeast Alaska. But we're seeing a lot of other people that probably will be weighing in on this. And I'm talking a lot about the tourism. I was really surprised this season to see several whale watching boats that showed up specific for the wildlife viewing. And of course, that's tied to the biomass of fish that are here in the spring. It seems like there's a movement. It seems to be more organized. We saw it recently at the council on the commercial versus subsistence arguments, and it does seem more organized, and it just is what it is. And I'm tying it to this of looking at alternative fisheries. I think it's really smart to be doing that. I think it's a good idea. But even back when we did the raw and kelp fishery, there was kind of two different sides to the subsistence argument. Some people were interested in conservation benefits from taking the eggs and not the fish, because the fish should come back. And then there also was a subsistence part of the population that just didn't want any forage fish fisheries. And so that's kind of the tough spot of being the single person that gets to talk about that. I think realistically, you know, and this is kind of talking the processes at the board and CFEC, that if there was a switch to, say, meal production, and all of a sudden this year's quota of 80,000 tons could have, you know, 70,000 or 67,000 could have went to meal production, people would go nuts, I think. I think there'd be a huge, you know, outreach to both the board, CFEC and to NOAA, for that kind of thing. And so I'm not saying don't, consider those things, but I think there's the reality of changing. I wouldn't necessarily say effectiveness, but I think awareness of the processes for folks who might not want to see change. I'm here to just kind of provide what I think the tribe wants me to say. I have my own personal ideas, but I'll try to stick with trying to recommend the group in making its recommendations. Look also from the standpoint of it would be so much easier if it looks like there, or if it can be demonstrated that there's some kind of conservation benefit. And that could be something like, not focusing on the spawning fish, which has always been a issue of the tribe. Increased research, I think, is something that would be a common theme that the tribal folks could support. And increased opportunity, and it's more of a CFPC thing, I guess, but it's kind of in line with what Frank Wood is talking about it's easier if it looks like there's increased opportunities, and realizing we're in, our towns are in a tough place, man. Our tribal and non-tribal people of having a hard time affording to be in our own towns, and so it's important, I think, to look at new opportunities for folks that are here. So again, it's a kind of tough spot to be in, I guess, I don't want to gum up the process at all, but also I'm primarily here to look for any kind of potential benefit for subsistence users. And while I bring more expertise in Southeast, I guess that goes for the discussion of value of the fish to subsistence people around the state. So just wanted to get that out of the way. I'm happy to be part of the process, and I'll probably be quiet until something really jumps out, or unless you ask for specific viewpoints on things that the questions are in your mind. So, but yeah, thanks for inviting me.
Yep, thank you, Mr. Miller. Thanks for being a part of the panel. So we've kind of had a general discussion, interest and ideas from panel members. Does anybody else want to discuss anything in a general format? Maybe something that hasn't been discussed already? Sure, go ahead.
So one question I had is, came to light that I think Sam mentioned this, a number of food and bait markets that are not fully utilized. Kodiak happens to be. I understand what's going on in Dutch. I'm less familiar with the other areas, so why aren't those other areas being fully utilized, and could those be developed? Is it logistics or what's, I guess that's one question. The other, as you're talking about this, and I realize there's probably a number of things that would complicate this, but could you develop other markets other than sac roe with sac roe fish? So could you use sac roe harvested fish for bait, or is the quality of the fish not good enough?
Appreciate that, Nick. I guess I'll speak to some underutilized areas. I mean, I can speak specifically to Prince William Sound, which has an open access food and bait fishery, which is different than Kodiak, but it's been closed for over 20 years now.
Nice.
But the biomass has been building and growing just as it has in other places around the state. I believe this year, if after the spawn is complete, it's very possible that they will have they'll go over the threshold necessary for actually having a fishery again, possibly next year. So it'll be interesting to see how that shakes out. Other parts of the state, we talked about Bristol Bay, which obviously is a completely different fish than most of the Gulf of Alaska fish, but Kodiak, as Sam said, is fully utilized food and bait. Other than that, besides what Bruce said about Dutch Harbor, I'm not sure about Southeast Alaska and how much of that resource. Maybe Mr. Peeler or somebody from Southeast can maybe, or Mr. Woodruff could touch on what percentage of that food and bait fishery is actually being utilized down there.
Well, I guess
Well,
I
this
could.
is John Woodruff. Go ahead, Justin.
Are you sure, John?
Go ahead, Justin.
Okay, so I guess I could speak to that. You know, I did the I participated. It's an open access fishery, food and bait fishery in Southeast Alaska. Is open access for seiners. It takes place in a few different areas. The main area is the Craig Kawak biomass. Down there, fishermen are only allowed to use a 1700 mesh net. At times, this net is significant. You know, it works fine. At other times, it does not, and you will drive around for weeks at a time looking at herring that you can't catch. And that is frustrating. It's frustrating for the fishermen. It's frustrating for the plant. You know, it's hard to keep crew engaged. And you know, there's limited buyers that are, you know, because of those reasons, are interested in opening their doors. I was, you know, I had a market with Icicle Seafoods and OBI Seafoods, and you know, EC Phillips is a buyer of bait herring in Southeast Alaska. They're I believe was the only ones that operated this year. Some of the Juneau plants are interested, but Craig is a long ways away from Juneau, so they're kind of second fiddle and buying their herring either through Icicle, OBI, or through EC Phillips if they want local herring, or they go outside to Kodiak and those places. So one of the things that is allowed in the Teneke area by emergency order is a 2100 mesh net by emergency order. That is the only area that that's allowed in. I won't go into details on that. I brought this up 20 years ago to the Board of Fish. It failed to match the 2100 mesh net in Craig and area. You know, there's fishermen against it. There were other users against it. You know, the whatever quota is left on the table in the Craig Kawak area and in other areas that has closed pounding in, that quota gets rolled towards the closed pounding fishery, which then allows them to have more blades and things like that. So there's all sorts of convoluted reasons of why, but the biomass is there. There's a very strong biomass in the Craig area. We talk about Southeast and Sitka wins the day, but there are biomasses all through Southeast Alaska that are doing well. That down by Ketchikan, that biomass is responded just like the biomasses around the state. I believe that some of the other biomasses are coming back and are responding also, but with limited budget and overview and no fishery, those are kind of left alone. And the other thing to note too is, so we have purse seine food and bait fisheries in Southeast Alaska, but also we have gillnet roe fisheries in Southeast Alaska. And those gillnet roe fisheries permits, some of them, if not all of them, and I don't know, I'd have to reach out to Glenn for this, are also food and bait. And I've talked to a couple of the gillnetters that have, you know, they want to go out and put up their own food and bait or bait. And because there's no roe fishery right now, they haven't even been getting their permits issued to them by CFEC. So I think that's something that Glenn's working on clearing up and trying to figure out why and what, and I'm sure he will. But that's a snapshot on Southeast Alaska. It comes down to, can you get a steady product to the plant? Uh, and lots of times the net size that we have works fine. But sometimes the fish stay below 30 fathoms, and they'll stay below 30 fathoms all winter, and you just can't get them.
Thanks for the insight in the Southeast. I just have maybe one question. I understand what you're saying completely about, harvesting can be difficult from year to year based on gear. Generally speaking, though, just to give the panel an idea, about what percentage of the allowable GHL for food and bait in Southeast is harvested? Just kind of an average. Is it 20%? Is it 50?
I would probably say it's a little higher than 20%, depending on how big that Craig Hallock quota is, but it's probably 20%. There's a little bit that gets caught here in Sitka Sound, but that is a cost recovery type fishery for fish and game. And that's why that exists. There is no food and bait fishery in the Sitka Sound area. So that's why that one exists. So I'd roughly say 20%. When I did it, it was probably somewhere around there.
All right, appreciate that. Sam?
I was just checking a little bit, hearing Justin's stories of accessibility of those fish down there, because when I'd fished here for several years for the winter time for food and bait, a lot of times those fish, you got your net depth and where the fish are, and your weight. There's certain times of the day they might come up. Here, a lot of times in the middle of the night, you flip on all your lights and they just work right up to the surface, and hey, this is working great. So we're down there and we got the fish at like 25, 30 fathoms, want them just a little bit shallower. You turn on some lights, boom, they go down to 60 fathoms every time. It's like, where did they get this memo out of the playbook? It's kind of interesting, but a very different fish, how it reacts down there. So accessibility is definitely an issue for us down there as well. One comment on the Dutch Harbor food and bait fishery and how much of that quota is being accessed out there. In preparation for this meeting, I reached out to Dan Verhusen with the Taurus. He's the main guy that's been catching it out there for the last several years, since that's kind of become a market co-op by processors. And he said the fish have changed. They've definitely changed. They're not in those bays anymore, but they're out other places, and he's been able to get them. And he stops fishing when his market is filled. So that's a little different than maybe some of the other words.
All right, appreciate that. And maybe I don't know, Bruce, or maybe Mr. Woodruff, if you could maybe touch on, I know the ideal situation is to harvest food and bait in the fall time when the oil content is it's as close to its peak as possible. Are there markets for fish in the springtime when the oil content may not be quite as high? Is that still a product that could be utilized for bait, or is it just something that buyers are not really interested in?
Hey, so if I could jump in here, this is John Woodruff.
Sure.
I've been making some notes as people have been talking. First of all, I'd like to agree with Mike Miller. A meal option really isn't, that's really not something I think we want to pursue. It's a meal fishery that destroyed the herring fishery back in the 30s and 40s. It would do it again if we gave it an opportunity. And so I agree with Mike that a meal focusing on fish meal from herring is not a good thing. I also saw lots of whale watchers out there when I was in Sitka this year, and a very, very robust spawn, which you'd expect with that kind of quota, with that kind of biomass, I should say. The other thing is, Mike, I think you mentioned the roe on kelp fishery. There was a push in the 90s to make part of Sitka roe on kelp fishery. I think that really wasn't, that was generated because in the early 90s, the fish size dropped to about 90 grams. The roe recovery, we couldn't get more than 9.5%, which is very low for Sitka. And so the value of that fish dropped hard. The fish did come back, and we ended up paying $1,500 a ton, I think I think it was 97, 96, somewhere in there. But but clearly what I'm seeing with this Kaznoko market is I have to say it's failing. And the Japanese are harvesting, they harvested, I think, about 10,000 tons of herring roe on their own island this year. And that number's been growing. So that's pushed back Alaska. And that fish, by the way, is 250, 300 grams, somewhat similar to Togiak size, although Togiak typically is 300, 400, maybe even 450 at the beginning, certainly. I guess the other thing is, I heard something about fillets. Bruce, you brought that up. We've talked about this before. Southeast herring, Sitka herring, is, and we buy the bait fish too. So, and we've been buying bait fish since the 80s. And in the old days, we'd buy 2,500 tons, but those markets just aren't there anymore. I mean, it used to be the crabbers used herring, and they loved it. They loved the Southeast stuff because the oil content was 21%. But those guys aren't doing that anymore. The longline guys have pretty much, they're not very many hook and line guys anymore. They're all pot guys, and they're not using the same kind of bait. And you try to sell that bait on the East Coast, and you're up against, 40 cents to get it there. And plus there's lots of herring harvest on the East Coast. Anyway, we've been buying that bait from Justin. It's good stuff. But I'll tell you, we're right now going to discard 125,000 pounds of bait we bought in early 2023 because we can't sell it. And buyers of that, the fishermen who buy that bait from us, they're going to want new stuff. They won't want the old stuff. Even if you discount it 50%, they want the new stuff. So bait is a challenge. And I agree with everyone who said we got to find something else. I think that's absolutely right. The other thing is Togiak. Togiak economics are extremely challenging. 2 years ago, there were two companies up there that bought fish during the Togiak roe fishery. We were one. They've challenged many challenges, but those plants typically aren't ready to go when you get there. So you got to spend some time getting there. You're still dealing with winter. And then you've got to bring a crew in. And you bring a crew in for 2 weeks, 3 weeks. You bring people in to feed them. You bring people in to house them. You bring all that stuff. And then what do you do with them? That's 6 weeks before Bristol Bay. If you hold those people in Bristol Bay, they're going to do nothing but get into trouble. And we know that because we've done it. We did it once. But that's one of the challenges of Togiak herring. Anyway, now I've forgotten your question, Mr. Chairman.
Oh, my question was, I believe it was something that Nick asked, was when the oil content isn't as high in the spring, are those fish?
Right. So Sitka herring, when we're buying it as a roe fish, it might be 10%, it might be 9%, it might be 8%. Togiak is a little better, I think, as I recall. But you get Southeast herring, like I say, in the stuff Justin caught for us this past winter, we were 20%. Prince William Sound, we were 18, 20%. Kodiak fish, we've been in that kind of for a bait fishery. When you process that fish into meal, and we've done this several ways. For a while, we were bringing fish to Seward and stripping it, thawing it and stripping it, and we'd make meal out of that. We get about 6% recovery on oil. And the meal was acceptable. It wasn't as good as you get from fresh, but you can sell herring meal. That's not an issue. The challenge is you're going to put 100 tons in that meal plant, and you're going to get 12, 13, maybe 14 tons of meal back. And if you're lucky, you'll get 6-8% oil. The oil is worth more for sure. Oil has lots of value. Salmon oil has more value, but herring oil has good value. But in a roe fishery, you're just not going to get recovery. And you'd start doing that from a winter fishery, you're just going to destroy the resource. Anyway,
All right.
my 2 bits.
No, that's good perspective. I think that is food for thought for people on the panel and the public to think about. So I think we've had a pretty good general discussion here for our first meeting. I think maybe we should move the agenda a little bit here. Next is, and I think Mr. Haight might touch on this, is just a discussion, general discussion about potential research ideas that might form here. So Mr. Haight.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chair. I'll see if I can just sort of facilitate the conversation and turn it to the panel for ideas. Part of this is to look at, what research has been done and what could help inform decision making, certainly from the board or from CFEC. And so we talked about looking at things market-based, legal and governance issues, and then some of the fish life cycle patterns in biology. And what I'm doing is I'm trying to put together what we've got as some current research, and I've got some notes from people on that, and I'll get that available to people once it's in more of a readable format. But yeah, maybe I could just turn it over to the group and just ask questions about market potential. And sounds like, John, you've looked at a number of different things. I know, Bruce, you've got a really good report on what's happening with North Atlantic herring in Eastern Europe and Africa. What else is out there that could be explored that would be helpful to look at? Maybe I could just put that maybe to John, because you seem like you've probably explored most everything.
So I'm by no means a market expert. I suspect Bruce has been into this more than me. I mentioned another person's name at the beginning, Warner Liu. He's also been working hard on trying to find, a place for herring in the world, in the food world. I would say that if you look at what's available in Alaska, you can freeze fish, you can can it. If you freeze herring, and several people mentioned it, you've got just a first piece that you're going to have to sell that to somebody who's going to have to make it into something. Yes, you could do fillets. That would be interesting. There's certainly a cost to that machinery and that setup. You have to put it in the right place, make sure you had resource it well into the future, and then you have to find a market for it. And maybe you could. I don't know. I think, again, Warner Liu is working on a can project on his own. He's got some cans. He thinks he can sell them. He's selling them piece by piece at this point. But I mean, if there's something out there that's going to deal with some volume and get harvesters on the water catching this fish up to its quota, it's going to be, I believe it's going to be something like that. It could be a frozen form, a fillet, but you're going to have to get ready. It's going to have to be ready for a consumer, and it's going to have to be ready for a consumer who can afford it. You can sell all the herring you want in Somalia, all that you want. Somebody mentioned another name too, maybe it's Ukraine. Yeah, the problem with that is they can't afford it. They can't get you enough money for it to allow you to make sense of it. So there are definitely some challenges, and anyway, that's my thought.
And John or anyone else, is there anyone trying to, maybe there's Warner, and I know we'll hear from him. He's on the list of folks to probably talk later. But looking at the domestic market, is there any niches out there that could be explored?
Well, they're probably niches, Jeff. But the issue is just, can you make the economics work? And what Alaska does, for better or for worse, is we mostly deal with huge influx of product, salmon mostly, and we deal with it as quickly as we can, because otherwise it's going to spoil. And so we're not attuned to dealing with little pieces here and little pieces there, and they tend to get in the way. And then you've got, as I said in Togiak, great example. You've got this labor issue where you bring people up for 3 weeks and then you got to send them home, and it's $1,500 a ticket. It's all those kind of things. I mean, if Warner's online, it's too bad he can't speak, because he's the guy that I know that really is working on this niche stuff, and it takes a lot of effort, it takes a lot of time, it takes some money.
Okay, thanks. Thanks, John. Yeah, we're looking to see if Warner was still on. He was on earlier. Yeah, I can see him. Does anyone else want to speak to, yeah, Bruce, thanks.
So Warner and I work a lot together on this stuff. He has a different take on it than I do. I'm looking at it more of from a large industrial. Like you have a big commercial cannery down here. Let's put up 2 million cases. Which is sort of the perspective I'm coming from. But there's other perspectives. For example, a little cannery over here in Klawak, wild fish cannery. You see it down here. It's the Fish Wives. They're down in LA. There's numerous ones around the country that are doing this. They tell me that their canned smoked herring is their best seller. Now, it definitely is. I think it's all hand packed for that matter. But again, without access to the resource, you're not going to get that type of economic development. Somebody that wants to get into it, decide that they're tired of beating their head against the wall, and they'd rather get into a custom processing sort of thing, whether you have to have that sort of access to the resource. Now, we talked about bait earlier. I hope everybody understands. Fish and Game could probably tell you. John could tell you. There's a tremendous amount of our roe herring that is sold as bait, that is turned into fish meal for various reasons. You sex the males out of it. What are you going to do? Well, you're going to sell it for sport bait. Hundreds and hundreds of tons of it. So we do have a little bit of inconsistency here with our regulation. It's okay to do this, but it's not okay to do that. You look at somebody's mentioned the Cook Inlet. There's a small gillnet fishery up in Upper Cook Inlet. That's almost exclusively used for bait, even though it's a roe fishery. So there's a lot of looking the other way going on here, while on the other hand, we're talking about governance and we can't do this, we can't do that. Justin mentioned the prohibition of Pacific herring in Maine. Well, that prohibition list is about that long, including pollock, including about everything you can think of. Well, that's something that could work also, because I testified to this in January. You call out to probably the primary users of bait in this state. It's the codfish fishery, and they're using Russian herring. Okay, they're using Mexican sardines. They're using millions of pounds of East Coast herring. Okay, it's all just flooding in here, and it's displacing our local products. Well, why is that? Well, and who's selling this product? Well, a lot of the guys, it's easier just to have a van of East Coast herring just shipped straight to Dutch. But on the other hand, we are in the economics, and the people that sell the bait, processing companies, whoever else it has to be, the supply companies for the larger fishing groups. What's cheapest? What can we get? And so we have a big amount of outside fish being used. Now, you talk about other products. John touched on it. We know from Warner and I have done it. A lot of people have done the work on the nutritionals, the oil content, what have you. The bigger the fish when they spawn, the more oil they got. Sort of like us old guys, compared to some 10-year-old screaming kid out on the street. It's just the way it works. Years ago, there was a meal barge came up work in Southeast during that roe fishery and those small fish, they couldn't get any oil out of them hardly. You know, it's in the single digit percentage, 4 or 5%. So it changes. If the larger the fish, you get into the over 200 gram fish, now you're into the fillet sizes. And this is all in that report. And the reason that report was done is because that North Atlantic fish is the world market. I mean, that's just fact, because they're closer to the they're set up for it. They're set up to feed Europe that eats herring for breakfast. So that's the market, and anything we do has got to fit into that market for the most part. So can we can it here locally? That's probably the best thing you do. Could we just fillet it right here locally, and it goes out to some of these markets like we've had requests for just in the last year, just in the last month? Those things are available, and those companies, it depends on what they're going to do with them. If they're going to can it, that's one thing. If they're going to pickle it, that's another thing. If they're going to smoke it, they all have different nutritional requirements, and it's laid out in that report also specifically. And that report, I just want to let you know, it was all done through personal interviews. It wasn't an internet research project. There were a lot of people all over the world that were interviewed specifically and interviewed confidentially. That's why there's a lot of them aren't named. That's all the way from the people who are actually harvesting the stuff, boats that hold 3,000 or 4,000 tons on board, all the way to the guy that's canning it, or smoking it, or pickling it in Denmark and Germany. So that, when you read the report, that's the reality you can relate to and how we can fit into that. So the last thing I'm going to say is, no matter what happens, at least at first, these big companies like John works for, they will decide at the moment, until we have access to bring in new people, we hope. They will decide what's done with the fish and who gets to catch it. Because you want to go, if you don't have the right relationship with the buyer, the buyers will decide how much is purchased and what it's used for and where it goes. So the idea of overrunning something with 100,000 tons, well, that's not going to happen. It'll happen by the people that want to buy it from the fishermen. And that's the way it goes right now. It's being consolidated more and more and more and more all the time to the wishes of at least the modern present day business plans of our principal processors.
Let me ask you a question if I could, Bruce, and tell me to buzz off if you want. But it seems like you're the sole voice, perhaps, in ASME looking at herring. When I pulled up your report, I had to trigger the box that said food aid. And though your report wasn't about food aid necessarily, it was a good market assessment for herring. You're right. If the processors aren't going to buy it and aren't going to work on these things, then there's little value in exploring it. But they drive what ASME researches and what ASME works on. So is there anything that you think we could do to encourage ASME to invest some more money into this with working with the processors? Because they are, you're right, they need to do the work on this.
They are also the board of directors. So requests specifically for that. The reason it's hard to find, and you find it over to the food aid thing, because I did it, and I put it, and I gave it to the website people, and it's a miracle you even found it.
It was hard.
You know, like your websites are, and once you find it, you can't find your way back. So that's the simple version. Hannah has done a lot of work around the world with herring. In fact, we put some herring up that went to the Boston Seafood Show. It'll go to, some of it will go to Brussels. It's used in Japan, China. And it's basically all you can show them is its availability. Well, and when you have, for example, Russia is saying they're going to triple, they're going to be close to 1 million tons, just like they're tripling everything that they've got. So they're putting it in. You know, there's a massive supply there, whether it's real or whether it's going to crash the resource in the long run. I can't tell you, but your specific thing about the herring is there is stuff being done, but not very much. And because it isn't being asked for necessarily by the people that are on the board of directors at ASPR.
I think that's fair. So we work on that.
Hey, Bruce, John here. You got me?
Go ahead, John.
Hey, so I found and read your report as well. I guess so. I wanted to respond to something you said, because I think you're making processors to be the bad guy here. And you show us an economic path, a path that makes sense, and we're all over it. I guarantee you. Show us a path that has positive economics, and we're all over it. It's a market situation. You got to find somebody who's going to buy this stuff at a price that makes sense, that will consistently buy it, so you can invest in the material, the equipment that you need to build whatever products you got. Show us the path.
I agree, John, and I don't mean to make you out as the bad guy. I'm just pointing out the reality of who decides who goes fishing and who decides what happens to the product. And I know it makes you seem like the bad guy. I don't mean it that way. It's just the reality of, it's at Togiak, you go from 100 boats to the next year to 20 boats, because you have to have a written invitation to come. In Dutch Harbor, 1 year we had 15, 20 boats, and the next year we all got the note that we only need 2 boats to do this, see you later. So it's, and whether it's, no matter what it is, of course, I'm a little jaded on the whole thing because of, so much of this product development, if you will, that I bring at the request of the legislature and of other parts of the industry, and you bring it. It's sort of you can show the horse where the water is, but you can't make him drink it, and that's just the facts of the business model of a multinational or a big giant company. Your economics are completely different than somebody else's, and that's all I was pointing out is on present day, the way fisheries work in Alaska, product form, access, fishery, it's all dependent on what the individual buyers want. So that's the only reason I bring that up, John.
Does anybody have any new ideas or anything else they'd like to? We're gonna have public comment in a minute, Nate, but specifically to the research ideas that Glenn was looking for. Anybody online? Because I want to try and get to public comments and make sure that everybody that came here and that showed up online has the ability to have a couple minutes to say something. So I don't see anything else. So Art, I think what we're gonna do is we'll go around the room here and open up public comments. We'll give people a couple minutes to say something in regards to the issues before us. So after that, we can go online. I'm not sure exactly how many people have
expressed interest online and commenting, but let's start here in the room. And if you'd like to comment, just raise your hand and then state your name for the record. And since you had your hand up, Nate, you want to go first?
Sure, thanks, Nate Rose. Right, in listening to the conversation here, this kind of back and forth dialogue between Mr. Hay, Bruce, John online, I think that there's an economic factor that needs to be researched, and that economic factor is the economies of scale per ton or per pound. Right, we have over 100,000 tons of available sacro harvest right now that's going to be left on the table for the rest of the 2024 year. And currently, you know, John has said that at the beginning of this whole presentation that supply, a manageable supply is ultimately a reliable supply is something that processors ultimately have always struggled with. And so when you take a look at the current situation we have some quota locked up because it's the regulatory system mandates that it be utilized a certain way. And so I'd be really keen on hearing processor input to say, if you had unlimited access to 100,000 tons of product, would you be more likely to try some new product form? Because I think ultimately that's right. Bruce is looking at this from how do we access the food market? And we're hearing from the processors that say that's not economically viable. Well, of course it's not economically viable if they have access to 800 tons out of Kodiak, 300 or 3,000 tons out of Dutch Harbor, and who knows how much out of Southeast. Nobody's going to do that because I mean, economies of scale, it doesn't make sense. But when you expand that and you explore the ability to utilize hundreds of thousands of tons, now you're taking the actual price per pound or the price per ton, you're diminishing that. And maybe you'd actually gain interest from the processing sector that they might want to try something new. So in going forward, I think looking at liberalizing uses for the product is vital. If you don't do that, you're always going to come up with the same answer, which is it's not economically feasible for us to do this with such a small pot of a resource.
Thanks, Nate. Anybody else? Ray? State your name for the record.
Raymond May here. I own a Southeast Sacro permit. I own a Kodiak Sacro permit. I probably made the last delivery in Togiak that was purchased for Sacro. I have access to the resource through Sacro. I'm sitting here listening to the conversation and the issues. I understand proposal 57. I understand the utilization of the bait herring in Kodiak. None of it seems to go for food. An idea, and I'm not saying it's right, I'm just trying to think how to try to make something work. What about coming up and defining what sacro means and maybe adding food to that, but not bait? So we're not touching the bait side and we're just figuring out how to utilize it for food. Food seems to be where the majority of the people are trying to go. And I'm not saying right or wrong, and I'm just thinking on like Sam's situation where Sam's got a food and bait permit. He's gonna be the only one that can do food or bait with that permit. And on the sacro side, we can do sacro or food. I'm trying to think of solutions like where to get somewhere for the access.
Well, let me ask you this. This is just a hypothetical. As a sacro permit holder in many different places around the state, would you be willing to, and this is obviously a theoretical question, would you be willing to give up part of the sacro GHL in the different areas that you hold one of those permits for a portion of that to be put into the food and bait season so that more access around the state is available?
I personally would, because I don't see a path forward with sacro. Okay. It's very limited. You got markets that keep dropping people that are sacro permit holders and no one that's picking up more permit holders that have access to continue going down that path.
Okay, thanks. Anyone
I know
else?
Everett.
Oh, sorry, go ahead.
Mr. Chairman, hi, Everett Anderson. I'm a Trillium travel member out of Dillingham. I'm also the Fisheries Policy Director for Bristol Bay Native Corporation. I get to work with Frank and Jeff Warner as well. Just these are more overarching topics. I might be repeating some things, but I think they're just from a perspective from the Bristol Bay region, which encompasses 31 villages within the region. So one of the areas of importance, of course, is just the health of the ecosystem and making sure that that biomass does remain healthy. It is serving other purposes, not just for subsistence and commercial applications, but what are they doing out in the Bering Sea Aleutian Islands before they're making their way back to Togiak in this case. I think that from our perspective, it's also what additional in-region economic activity can be accomplished through utilizing this very important species. And again, challenges that we're all facing with high costs of doing business in remote locations. It certainly is a challenge, but it's not insurmountable. I'll touch on that in a second. The other thing, just sitting through this last council process with chum salmon bycatch, there was a pretty significant, not significant, there was a section on herring PSC. And I think that's something, this dialogue overlap between State of Alaska Board of Fish and council analysts just remains open, so that we're kind of, keeping track of, other user group sectors that may be wanting to identify that as a, PSC for some of their respective fisheries. We're really fortunate to have our congressional delegation advocating quite intensively on our behalf in terms of infrastructure across the state of Alaska. And so the Working Waterfronts Act that Sarah Murkowski is actively pushing for does allow for some of these opportunities to really parallel these discussions with what may be coming here in the next year or so in terms of coastal community infrastructure, low cost energy, cold storage, kind of the list goes on about how are we really truly fully capturing the value in our respective communities so that we're not having to send it off to get reprocessed somewhere else and maybe overcome some of these barriers and challenges that we're going to be seeing from some of these other countries that are posturing pretty powerfully right at the moment. On the market side, I think part of the challenge there is getting this remarkable, amazing fish in front of people and getting them eating it. And these things can happen simultaneously with everything that we're doing now, whether it's the regulatory policy side of it, but getting people to start eating this fish, particularly on the domestic side. And we're challenged. I mean, the fresh fish case, the frozen case, there's just a lot of noise with all these other species that are kind of floating around. So I think that's a challenge, but we do have, I think, collective resources that can start to maybe get that fish in front of people and start to identify these kind of multi-channel approaches that Bruce has done a really good job at. And that report is extremely helpful. I think that could probably be an addendum could probably be attached to that with ASME's resources in terms of focusing more on domestic, what's happening in our own backyard, and the channels being USDA commodity, global food aid, USDA SNAP. For those of us that are part of tribal community, USDA tribal relations, and then of course the retail food service and value add approach. But whether it's BBDC, BBNC, the tribes within the region, we're all here to support this effort. So I appreciate being able to be here.
Yeah, thank you for your comments, and we appreciate you coming in person, especially. Go ahead, Darren.
Darren Platt, local fisherman. I know this is a statewide board, but I just want to mention what's kind of particular about Kodiak, because as you analyze this, you do need to look at it region by region. as Sam mentioned, Kodiak, you have full utilization of the bait fishery. So that means that, you know, they're not setting that quota based on the demands, they're setting it based on biomass. It's unlikely that, you know, the biomass is exactly meeting the demands of the fishery. So they're already knocking on the door of expansion and, you know, a ready market to get more product out there. You've got multiple fishermen in this room who are willing to do it right away. You've got processors who are ready to buy it. So, you know, I know you have these other regions where they're not utilizing their food and bait herring fishery. But the idea that you're going to sort of force them to do it because they're not doing it, and we're doing it here in Kodiak, I think is a little bit misguided. You know, Bruce said you can lead a horse to water, but you can't make him fish. I think it's the same, Bruce. And so here we're ready to do it. Additionally, Kodiak has a year-round operational high volume processing capacity already in place, so that you don't need the processors to suddenly fire up to take a bunch of herring. If they're ready to do it, they got the people there and they're already doing it. You also have a GHL that between the two fisheries are set at 11% with biomass. And so when you look at Sitka and you look at Bristol Bay where they set it at 20, we are well below what's accepted to be the sustainable exploitation rate. So the sort of implications of overages in our fishery don't have as much of a sustainability impact as it does in these other areas. But we're set at 55% of what is already considered to be a sustainable exploitation rate. So if you expand the fishery a little bit and worry about overages, we have a huge safety factor. I mean, and I just wanted to echo what Bruce had said about sort of the frustrations with the CFEC, because we had a proposal in place. You had a board that seemed ready to at least really consider it. You have a public that's generally in support of it, and we have one letter from the CFEC that states an objection. You know, and I get their objection. I think it's fine, and I think it was appropriate for them to say that. But they didn't even state, really the statute that would be a violation of. They were just saying basically this may violate the law. And in those cases, I think we're best off letting the courts sort that out. There's no case law that really deals with how the CFEC and the Board of Fish should deal with product types of fishery. That doesn't exist. And maybe the courts may even find that it was really what the error was in the past, when we have the CFEC and we have the Board of Fish, mandating product types were necessarily limiting the economic capacity and productivity of these fisheries. And they should probably stay out of that channel. And I know Ray said that maybe don't allow the sacro fishery to catch bait, but ultimately the underlying principle of both the Board of Fish and the CFEC is to make sure that we're getting the maximum value of the fishery and that we do so sustainably. And we're ready to do that. We're there. We're just waiting for sort of you guys to pull the trigger. So I hope we can move forward with this. And I hope Kodiak in particular, hope you guys understand that we're ready for it here.
Thanks, Darren. Anyone else in the room before we go online? Okay, Art, I think we've taken all the public comments we have in the room. Do you have anybody online that would like to speak?
There we go. We do. And for any of the public online through Zoom or on by phone, please use the raise hand feature. That's one of the buttons on the bottom of your screen. If you are on by phone, you can raise your hand and toggle that feature by pressing *9. So the first one we have is George Pappas with the Office of Subsistence Management.
Thanks, Art. Go ahead,
Office of
George.
Subsistence Management, State Subsistence Liaison. Am I coming through fine?
Yes, you are.
George Pappas, OSM, can you hear me?
Yes, we can.
Not, my microphone's working. It looks like it's not, you can't hear me.
George, we can hear you.
Does that help at all? Can you hear me, team?
We've heard you all along.
Up your volume.
Oh, they can't hear me. I'm sorry. I guess I can't hear you. I'll make this quick. The Federal Subsistence Regional Advisory Council in the Southeast, a member wanted to ensure that I brought to the attention of this process. Some folks may not be aware, some folks may. There's federal subsistence fisheries jurisdiction across Alaska. in marine waters. Not much. The primary one that most folks know about is around McNally Island at the Sitka Airport, about 500 to, or how many acres it is there. It's closed on fairly qualified users, and it's specifically for federal subsistence herring fishing. That's why they keep that closed for herring. In other areas, starting up north, Nunivak, 3 miles from all state waters around Nunivak under federal subsistence fisheries jurisdiction, a water column, and the bottom of the ocean there. Also around the fog neck within 3 miles of the shoreline. Also Owens Bay, Gibson Cove, and off the mouth of the Carlick. That's all I have. It's just to make sure during decision-making process that you're aware there's federal subsistence fisheries management jurisdiction in some of those areas. I do appreciate your time. Thank you. I'll answer any questions. Thank you.
Thank you, George. I don't see any questions. I'll just let you kind of run this, Art. So
Sure. Yeah, next person with their hand up is Jeff Feldposh.
Good morning. My name is Jeff Felpatch. I'm the Resource Protection Department Director for the Sitka Tribe of Alaska. Wanted to bring up a couple of other research needs. The state, as far as I know, is required to manage the resources for its maximum value. That brings up the question, how much are these herring worth left in the water for other indirect or non-consumptive commercial uses? As Mr. Miller had mentioned, we have a lot more whales showing up in the Sitka area, and the tourism industry is starting to take advantage of that. We also were approached by a couple of trawlers this last spring about adding herring to the forage fish management plan. So that is a proposal the Sitka tribe has submitted. The second research need, and this is very important, you need to have stock differentiation for out of season or out of spawning season fisheries. The Sitka tribe teamed up with the geneticists from the University of Washington under NPRB funding and did some genetic work on the Sitka Sound herring stock. Basically, we were able to map the genome of that stock. NOAA researchers from Auk Bay had also supplied the university with herring from the Auk Bay Lynn Canal stock. Those stocks are different, is what the report came back. And actually, the Lynn Canal stock, if I remember right, was more closely related to stocks down in Puget Sound. The other part of this this whole scenario is there were tagging studies done in the 1930s and in the 1960s that show these stocks mix outside of their spawning season. There was the 1960 study tagged herring off of Whale Bay on the outer coast of Baranof Island. One of those herrings actually showed up, and the tag showed up at Yassa Island, which is in the middle of Chatham Strait, where Frederick Sound meets. So the misconception that these are all one stock per region, it's wrong. And additional work needs to be done to map the genome of all the stocks within the state. That's all I've got. Thank you.
thank you. Go ahead, Art.
Next we have someone online by the name of Peter. I'm gonna give you talking privileges. You'll need to unmute your line and go ahead. Please give us your first and last name.
Sure. Hello. This is Peter Bradley. I just wanted to ask for a clarifying question. Board Member Carpenter, you talked about herring recovering across the state. And Justin Peeler, you said that biomasses were responding in other places in Southeast Alaska. What are they recovering from and responding to? Thank you.
Well, I'll just touch on this. I don't want to really get into a question and answer session here, but when I stated that Prince William Sound herring were recovering, that was pretty much the recovery happened because of the Exxon Valdez oil spill, which was in 1989, and it's been a slow process for the stocks to recover. And over the last 5 years to 10 years, they've started to make some real improvements, and that's basically what I was trying to make a point of.
Okay, thank you. And just to follow up, on John Woodruff mentioned that he didn't think that fish meal was the path here, if I understand correctly, and Mike Miller mentioned that people might go a little nuts if there are indications that movement is being made to restore herring reduction fisheries across the state. And so if that isn't the intention of this committee, I would urge the committee to make that clear. Thank you.
Thank you, Peter. Appreciate the comments.
Now, if there is anyone else online that wants to talk, please use the raise hand feature, or if you're on by phone, press *9. That'll indicate to us that you would like to speak. Right now, Tom, I'm not seeing anyone else. I will let you know if I see hands go up. Oh, there, someone just popped up. Here we go. Someone by the name of Dan. I've given you permission to talk. You will probably need to unmute, but go ahead and give your first and last name. Dan?
Yes, hello, this is Dan Verhusen. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can.
Yes, I fished at Dutch Harbor Food and Bait, and I've been out there for 36 years or so. And Bruce mentioned that was me, took fish to Brussels, and helped me get them through customs and keep them frozen and put them out there at the Brussels Seafood Show. And yes, there was a tremendous amount of interest when they saw those big, beautiful 400+ gram fish. And I also had sent fish down to Oregon to a lab and had all of the lipids and all of the technical of what the fish was, where it was at, oil content and omega-3 and everything. German fella, just for one person, came by and he wanted 10 van loads, which is a couple 100 ton, about 20 ton a van. I'll take this for a sample. And I'll get back to you, and if I like them and we can work with them, we'll take 10,000 tons. Well, that was like, okay, there we are back to having access to the fish. And that was 20 years ago. I just pulled the folder out here while this was going on. That was in 04. And Chuck Bundren, he came up to the ASME stand there at the Brussels Seafood Show, and he shook my hand and congratulated me and yada yada. And then it was all good. And then he started there out of Acatan trying to get fish that were of food quality. And, you know, because a lot of times the fish, herring are herring, you never sometimes know what you're going to get. So they weren't full of krill or anything. And eventually they got some fish from another boat, and he had quite a hard time. But I don't know whatever happened to that, because they haven't been doing the food fish and been pursuing that anymore, as far as getting the perfect quality for the food fish there. But I think, you know, like Justin had mentioned there, problems we run into is our net restrictions, because you never know where herring are going to be on the surface, or they can stay down. And it has its challenges, but I think it'll find its own way in general if the biomass in all around the state is as big as everybody thinks it is, to be able to give the fishermen access. And I think the processors will see an opportunity, hopefully, and we'll be able to get this thing off the ground. Like I said, I might have been a little ahead of my time, as that was 20 years ago. But some of the challenges are that we found that in the North Sea, those seasons, you know, you need to do a timing thing also of when to get the fish to the major markets that go in people's mouths in Europe. They eat them for breakfast, and they love it. But that's about all I have to say here, but I'd be glad to answer any questions.
Thank you, Dan. Appreciate you calling in, giving us your perspective on things. I don't see any questions from anybody, so appreciate it. Anyone else, Art?
At the moment, I don't see anyone else with their hand up. If there is public that would like to talk, please use the raise hand feature.
Okay, well, we can keep public testimony open for a few minutes here. We've pretty much accomplished what we set out to do today. Kind of the last thing on the agenda is kind of what the next steps may be. As I stated earlier, I think the goal of this committee is to have at least one meeting, possibly two, sometime in the fall. I guess between the three of us here, we can we're trying to maybe work that into a schedule where there's potentially a board of fish or some other meeting going on, so that people within the community, different user groups and communities, can participate in a public format like you guys had the ability to do here at Kodiak. So that's kind of where I'm at, Glenn. I don't know if you have anything else to add right now.
A couple of remarks. Yeah, I mean, it takes me a while to soak in what I've heard, and heard a lot today. It was really helpful. I will continue to work on putting together a research plan, get that out to all the panel members. If anyone else has ideas about things, you know, possible solutions, things to look at, please just send them to me. It doesn't have to be a panel member. I mean, even really appreciated some of the problem solving comments here. Raymond had, you know, an interesting idea about how to treat permits. You know, but those kinds of things may be small, but it might be a solution. And we can work with Noah and other folks, Department of Law, to look at some of these questions and see what might come from it. But very helpful. And I haven't been in government a lot for a long time. Whenever you have the public sector outnumber the government employees in the room, it's great. And we did that, and there's so many people online. The reaction to this committee has been very good, and I appreciate all the help.
Mr. Godfrey, you have anything?
No, I found this to be a fruitful discussion. Appreciate everyone's candid perspectives on this. You know, hopefully we can walk away with something concrete out of this, and I look forward to what that looks like.
Sounds great. Anyone else, either online on the panel or in the audience here in the panel, have any final comments or any suggestions about, other than research ideas that can be forwarded to Mr. Haight? I encourage the public to also, if they have ideas, to bring those forward either in the future or through the email process. I think that'll work. I don't think that we'll probably meet again until sometime in October or November. I would say that's the general time frame. Obviously, everybody's really awfully too busy in the summer to have any more of these meetings, but we'll have the summer to think about it, and maybe we'll get some more ideas from people in the processing sector in regards to market ideas, things like that we can consider in the future. And other than that, Mr. Peeler.
Yeah, I think it might be important as we move forward in these meetings that we start to specify time for certain areas. Like this is a statewide committee, but you know, there's you know, discussion on Kodiak, then discussion on Southeast, to kind of what works in one area is not going to work in the other, and to allow to have that so that we can talk about the other users, subsistence, the other permit holders. Most of us involved here are seiners. There's, I've had interest from Southeast Gill Netters who have reached out to me and asked me a few questions, and I know the row on kelp people are probably listening in and wanting to know how that's going to go and things like that. So I think maybe in the agenda process or something like that, if we can separate out the areas so we can have discussion on each area at each meeting as new information comes alive. So we're kind of educating ourselves on each area and how different it is.
Okay, thank you for that suggestion. We'll definitely take that into account when we come up with the next meeting agenda. And I'm not sure if we're going to be able to do that at every meeting, but I think that you're right. I think that there's different regulations. Subsistence users are affected differently in each region of the state. Commercial fisheries are also a little different. So we'll try and figure out a way to maybe incorporate that idea into a future agenda. Anyone else online have anything? Well, Art, if you don't have any other public comments online, I guess for myself, I'd like to thank everybody from Kodiak that stopped by to listen, everybody online likewise. Like I said, we will broadcast when the next meeting's going to be through the Board of Fisheries website. I believe that's the way we did it this time. I'm sure Mr. Haight, if he has any ways of advertising things like this on the CFEC site, I'm sure he would do that as well in the future. Art, thanks to the board staff for making all this work, and to everybody in Kodiak that works for the department and making the room available to us, and setting up the logistical things to make this online kind of hybrid process work. I personally appreciate it. So if there's nothing further, I would go ahead and close the meeting at 11:30 a.m. on April 12th. So thank you, everyone.
Thank you.
Yeah, so. Yeah.
That went all right.